Welcome to another episode of Spirit World. You got your boy Spiritual here. I've got my girl Luna, and we've got some interesting artists, some diverse artists. We're going to show you how we do it. Okay, Stevie Boy, man, how's things, man?
That's you.
Yeah, goods. Anderson Paak last night.
Yeah?
Rodigan on Tuesday. So yeah, been
Where was Anderson Paak?
Alexandra Palace, which is
a
nightmare to get to, a nightmare to get back from. But yeah, it's sick.
Wicked, man. We saw Anderson Paak with the festival.
Love Box.
Yeah, Love Box, yeah. And then I came back and I had a flooded. This whole place was flooded. I've got a special guest here today.
We do indeed.
We do indeed. One of the
It's
dirtiest.
certainly not me. I don't.
One of the dirtiest strangers I've ever met. Yeah, this guy is a legend. This guy's been on the scene for a good while. A seasoned vet, personal friend of mine. This guy is knowledgeable about lots of things, not just music. He's a connoisseur of music and also a man of knowledge on everything. An avid book reader. And this guy, like I said, personal friend of mine. I'm blessed to know this guy. I would like to introduce John Proctor. Come in, John Proctor. John Proctor. Father and son. Nice, isn't it? Family. Yes.
All family.
Yes, all family.
Still dirty.
And this is my family as well, but I come to London as well. I come to, how long have I been in London? Since 1999. But I've known you since, how long?
15 years-ish?
Yeah. So, Luna,
it's been a while. Still can't get rid of you though.
I know. That's because now I'm a family. Luna, careful. Wait, can I move? Where do you want me to move to? I'm supposed to be.
You're a new host. Yeah.
I'm supposed to be hosting this show.
Generation. Come on, Luna.
Okay, where are you gonna sit? Where are you gonna sit? So you gonna stand over there?
We know the star of the show now.
Exactly. I'm just.
There we go.
Okay, there you go. Okay, you can stand there. Okay. Yeah, we talk about family. Family. La Familia. Yeah, so basically, you guys are my family in London. You know what I mean? My family in London, without a doubt. You know what I'm saying? Gotta say happy birthday to my ultimate rock chick, your wife, your mum, Anne. Love you, Anne. Happy birthday. You know what I'm saying?
Happy birthday,
Yeah, ultimate rock chick for real. Alright. So I'm gonna get to you, John.
All right.
Yes. The star of the hour.
The start of the hour, really? the meter's running then.
Okay, so I'm gonna start with the beginning. Well, not the very beginning.
No, because that'd be dinosaur time.
I'm gonna talk about maybe teenage years. Okay, is that when you first? I'd say
about 50 years ago.
When did you first start getting into music seriously?
About 50 years ago.
How old was you?
School bands, 17, 15, 16, 17, playing at school gigs, concerts, end of year shows.
Okay, but
youth clubs.
Yeah, but this sounds like you played. How did you start? Okay. Let's go to the very beginning. What was it like growing up in your house? Where was music in regards to that?
Well, it started, born in the 50s, so you grow through the 50s and you've got the birth of rock and roll, Elvis, Buddy Holly, all of that. Growing up, you're just surrounded by it. So by the 60s, then you've got the Beatles, the Stones coming through, and you're still in the middle of it. So you're about 12, 13, and they're just starting, so everybody wants to be a Beatle or a Stone or so you keep practicing.
So everybody, you say everybody, but was it really
friends at school, brothers, everybody wanted to play a guitar. It was just a revolution in terms of everybody being exposed to the first time you could go and buy a guitar, you could get out, you could form skiffle groups, you could make basses out of tea chests and a broomstick.
So what would you say this year was 1950s? We're talking 50s?
50s and through to the 60s.
Yeah. So before this, what was the world like? Because there's always this impression that the world was black and white, and then all of a sudden rock and roll came and it all turned to colour. So,
it did.
Was it really like that before the war? It was. It was.
When you still had in the early 50s, you still had rationing. from, you know, sweets I don't think came off the ration book until the early 50s, 53, 54, something like that. And then like 55, 57, you get the Bill Haley, Elvis all coming through. And that's like the start of it. And within 10 years, you've got like sort of the Beatles and the whole 60s revolution. And I mean, it's only what, 10 years after that, you've got Hendrix coming to London and stuff like that. So if you go from 57 to 67, you've got the birth of the Beatles, the Stones, Hendrix, right the way through, you know.
So what? Sorry.
Do you remember the first time you heard them, like rock? Where you were? Like, is it one of those like events
Saturday night would have been Thank Your Lucky Stars and the Beatles doing.
Thank You Lucky Stars, a TV show.
Yeah.
A talent show.
No, it was just and it was like they were a new act on it, and it was either Please Please Me or She Loves You or whatever the first. I don't think it was Love Me Do, but it was just maybe their second single.
Okay.
And it was just black and white TV Saturday night, and they were on a show that you might have had Frank Highfield or like middle of the road singers, but it was called Thank You Lucky Stars. I think it came.
Well, before them was Elvis. You guys were into Elvis, was you? Was you not into Elvis?
I would have been about 6.
Okay.
So I mean, even I couldn't have been that.
So what's the difference between year difference between Elvis and the Beatles? Is it 10 years?
About 5 years, 10, 8 years, between 5 and 10 years from them discovering the Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly would have been the late 50s. By 62 they were in Hamburg, or 61 they were in Hamburg. So I mean, I think George Harrison was there, and he was only 17 or 18 in the early years at Star Club. And in fact, I think they got thrown out of Germany because he was too young to actually be working over there.
We went to that club, didn't we?
Yeah. They got the museum there as well.
Yeah. Okay, so it was literally like that. Okay, so before then, did you have access to music like blues or anything like that from America?
You were all discovering everything, you know. Sort of in as like I think when we were doing some of your stuff back in the few years ago, and looking round and seeing that whatever it was you had running on the screen, Zeppelin concert from '69 or '70, and me seeing myself there as like a 17-year-old.
Yeah, I'll explain that to everyone. You know what I mean? That John was at my house. You know what I mean? One of my regular chill out at the house and talk about music and stuff. And I had a projector and I was putting on, was it Led Zeppelin?
Yeah,
concert?
live from the Albert Hall.
And he managed to see himself in the crowd. Really? Yeah.
And I can remember the moment standing there at the encore. Like, I'm standing there thinking, I want to do this. I could do this. Got no idea how I was going to do it, but having that dream.
Okay, so
then forward to the Dirty Strangers.
No, that's too
and
much.
We did.
That's too
Was
much.
that one of the first shows you saw?
No, because you could go in a week. You could go. I think like they had the proms. You could have seen Zeppelin, Family, The Who, Chuck Berry, Brownie McGee, all in a week, different nights. Jethro Tull, Bloodwind Pig, Liverpool. Yeah.
They're easy to get into. Obviously,
Yeah, because they're cheap as well, probably.
Cheap, yeah, but you know.
Well, it was all relative in terms of money, but I mean, you could go to the Marquee in Wardour Street, not the original one in Oxford Street, but I mean, yeah, I mean, it was just music was all around. I think even the day of the Stones free concert after Brian Jones had done, I think I went to that in the afternoon and then crossed the road.
Oh, you went to?
Yeah, I mean, just and then you cross the road and you went to, I think it was the Who supported by Chuck Berry at the Albert Hall. So that was all in one day. You might go on a Friday night to Parliament Hill, Hampstead way, and there'd be free concerts up there, and you'd get Fleetwood Mac or Pink Floyd playing. Just a free all-nighter. I mean, yeah, it was just music was all around.
So so every teenager then at that time wants to be a guitarist or wants to be
you could be, yeah.
Okay, so what about parents-wise? Was there support there? Do you think, or was there like
my
that
parents,
rock and roll? Because was it that kind of?
No, my parents
opposite?
supported us. My brother and I. My brother got drum lessons because that's what he wanted to do. I had guitar lessons, and I think my parents were told to save their money and stop wasting it on my guitar lessons. But perseverance, and even when I wanted to get into the studio, it was my dad that put up the guaranteed get a bank loan to buy out a guy at the rehearsal studio in '74.
Well, as a parent at that time, do you think it was it
that
like,
was unusual. I would have said it was unusual.
This get a proper job. This is not realistic in a sense.
No, it was always experiment. Put your hand up for anything. If there's a school trip going to Russia, Spain, anywhere, you go for it. You go and do it. We'll find it. We'll get it sorted. And the same with education. You stay there until you're finished with your education or whatever. And then job-wise, and then even when I changed from a straight job to just diving into the studio, that was all part of their support. And yeah.
Did you have a lot of friends that fell by the wayside from school that didn't get the opportunity to play, or did?
They played, and then, like everybody else, I think everybody that I knew from that secondary school has either got a guitar in their attic, or they've given up, or they wish that they'd kept going, or people like Dave with the art gallery that now decorates guitars and has guitar lessons. He was one of the first people that I ever played with when we were still learning. He knew more chords than I did because his dad played the mandolin.
He's at the Albert. You and him
at the Cream show. The Cream farewell concert. Thank you.
Are you going to play something?
But the Cream farewell show, I think he kept his ticket stub for that.
Was there any of that sort of thank you? All I can do in this guy is sing.
Don't encourage that.
The Who.
Was there any of that, like nowadays, if you get a ticket stub or you get any sort of memorabilia, people are obviously selling it, trying to keep it. Was there any people, or was there any sort of notion of, this is going to be valuable in the future?
I pretty much doubt it, because a lot of people even now sometimes don't realise how this time, at that time, there's probably even less.
But did you know you're in a particularly unique special time, or is it just?
I might have kept a bit more of it if I had.
They probably thought it could be a fad, like it's not going to last.
Yeah. It's also the fact that, like, when I met Hendrix, you wouldn't actually be bothered to take a photograph. Nowadays, everything's based around taking a photo, recording that moment. In that day, you'd have had to go to a phone box to make the call, to tell someone to come round and bring a camera or an Instagram or some way.
Explain that how you met Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix.
At the Albert Hall. He was due, I suppose, for sound check, and I was driving past, and I'd stopped, knew that he was playing that night, had tickets for the show, and he just stopped. Got out of a taxi, a minicab you'd call it, so just a big saloon, 2 guitars, no cases, got out of the car, I got out of my car, went over and said, would you sign the back of the record mirror or whatever it was? And he passed me the guitars, asked me if I was going to the show, really nice.
What Hendrix is this? Is this just come to London, or is he a superstar at this stage?
He must have been, playing at the Albert Hall, headlining the Albert Hall. He would have had, it's gone past Hey Joe, but I mean...
Because he was big straight away, wasn't he, after Hey Joe? Everybody
I think the first album came out soon after that, so I mean, it was like Savile Theatre Sunday night. I think I saw him with Procol Harum at a small theatre, Shaftesbury Avenue, and then within a couple of years, I mean, the whole thing of his only lasted 4 years. I mean, because he died in 1970, I think. So I mean, if you go from 67 to 60 to 70, you've only got 3 or 4 years. So the whole thing was.
Okay, you don't watch CBBS.
Okay.
Do you want to CBBS, or should we talk to John and find out about some rock and roll history?
Yeah.
CBBS or rock and roll history? CBBS.
Was there any artists that you saw back then that were big or on the way to getting big that never made it, that you're surprised about not having the legacy that some of the others did? Or did they seem to have dragged up like everyone from that time with some sort of documentary or something?
Because it was so groundbreaking, I suppose. Even if it was like Jethro Tull, their guitarist is still going round, and my best friend's son is now playing drums with him on a sort of 60-day American tour, and the end of the month I think he's under the bridge at Stamp. But he was the second guitarist in Jethro Tull. So for all those classic albums like Aqualung, Thick as a Brick, that you go back to 1970 when Jethro Tull would have been one of the biggest bands in America and over here. Martin's still playing, and now it's like Darby, Brett's son, is playing drums with him. This, you know, it's just it's all one big circle.
Yeah, it's like, I suppose it's a community. It's a community of musicians, and they all get together and they all go to the same places and they all meet, and you're what's going to inspire each other.
Well, yeah, when I ran into, I think, Alan from the Dirty Strangers, he'd already been in the Dirty Strangers and disbanded that. That had come to the end of its first generation, as it were.
So when you moved into, I mean, how did you meet the Strangers?
I knew Alan from before because we'd done a few gigs when they were in their prime, as it were. And then I was coming back.
What was you? You was in another band at the time?
Yeah, other bands, either Lionheart, Double Agent, Valhalla would have been in the 70s, I think, when that would have been early gigs at the Marquee Club, opening up for ACDC or whatever. And then...
But you make it sound nonchalant. For years I've been in London trying to put together bands, and it's so hard to get this musician together with this musician. A drummer can never turn up. How have you managed to put so many bands? Like, how did you get into the band in the first place? Like, could you make it sound like you just got into a band? Like,
you did. You had lots of people in those days.
Was it an advert on the shop window when looking for a bass player?
You had newspapers in the days before all this electricity. You had newspapers like Melody Maker, and you could put an ad in there for like a couple of quid. Drummer wanted, bass player wanted, guitarist wanted, vocalist wanted, and you'd get then people answering the ad, and you'd go, we'll have an audition day, and you'd get drummers coming in or guitarists, whatever you were looking for, or singers.
So your first band that you ever joined, what was the name of that band? That you was ever in?
We formed it, I think, out of the mates from school. I think the guy that now lives in music, Rich Cranabert, he was the singer, my brother was the drummer. I played bass because there was a guy called Alan Damon that we'd met either through an ad or through somebody else saying, oh, do you know this guy? And that was the first generation of that. And then...
You named the group?
Pardon?
You named the group?
Yeah, I think that was Wat Tyler, or that might have been... Yeah, I think that was Wat Tyler. Was like the first school band. Yeah. And
okay, so
an old acetate floating around of some of that stuff.
Cool. So you started from there, then you got into that band disbanded, into another band.
Yeah, it just morphs and it keeps changing and it evolves, and like then you meet, say, a drummer and he says, oh, I know someone that plays guitar living over this way off Chamberlain Road, and you come and meet him and he says, oh yeah, I played classical guitar in this and I want to get into electric guitar. And then that becomes another generation of the band, and then Richard I still know sort of 40 odd years later, you know.
So what makes, for you, what's important to be bandmates? Like, what's in a band, if you're going to be in a band with someone, is it about the friendship, or is it about just the musicality, or is it about both?
Well, you've got to have a common ground that you're all on the same page, otherwise there's
Oasis have gone on for years, hating each other at the Kinks so as well.
but that only comes as later on when it like this. Usually that comes, the divisions come with success. So like as it becomes like there's money involved, or you become more successful, you find that if you're lucky enough to have a record company, the record company will be wanting to isolate the songwriter or the main man or the front man or the guitarist, or they'll be saying, oh, that drummer's like, no, we could get another drummer in, or and that all tends to like cause the friction within the bands.
Okay, that's probably been the downfall of quite a lot of bands.
Well, I mean, even if you go UB40, the Campbell brothers in that, Oasis. I mean, you know, any band that's got brothers in, the Beach Boys, they've got classical feuds. Even the Everly brothers didn't even travel together towards the end.
You got Queen's Power Rangers and the Dirty Strangers. Lose yourself your back and you won't see the dark track. Rest in peace, Jeffers Bird. Shepherd's blue ceiling.
Well, it wasn't the Strangers at the time. It was Alan. I bumped into Alan on a school run, coming back from a school run. I was either dropped Stephen or his brother off, and Alan was on a building job in Fulham, and he was in the middle of the road, and he said, "Oh, stop! What are you doing tonight?" And I said, "Well, not a lot." He said, "Do you want to come over and have a jam? I'm playing with this new drummer George, and I want to get a new band together." So that started in about 98, 99, and it lasted until I left in about 2016, something like that. So about 18 years.
18 years. Wow.
With this, yeah. So you get longer for murder. But there you
that's a
go.
long time for as we said with relationships, that's a long time for anyone to stay together, necessarily a band. So I mean, what would you think? First of all,
even within the Strangers, that changed.
Yeah,
I mean,
that
we had
time.
various drummers, Scotty would come back in as a keyboard player, then he'd go, and he'd come, and it kept changing, or it evolved. And then there was a couple of years off when Alan went off to join the Stones tour, and he was just like looking after the guitars or whatever on the Stones thing. But by then I was playing with, or the blues band that I was playing with had got off the ground. And we were opening the Twickenham Stadium for the Yardbirds in the live lounge there, and playing the Eelpire Club and all those traditional blues places. Yeah. So I was running 2 bands by that time. Right. And shortly after that, I think you and I became Spiritual World, or whatever it was, and we created with the acoustic guitars and then transferred that into a studio. So there's always been something going on.
Yeah, because that was quite organic, the way we started doing
music. Well, it had to be organic because I was playing guitar for the first time in 40 years.
Who is it? It's Spirit. I'm just a posh tramp with liquor, I'm exquisite. I was young and dumb, now I'm old and cold with it. Friends in grades and I don't even go visit. Yo, counts down, Battle Royale. Boy 15 dies, he was born to rebel. So, keep it simple, my message is to decode. 9mm to your temple. Whoa, keep it simple, my message is to decode. 9mm to your temple. Explode.
Yeah, because I mean that was organic because like I said, because we hanged out together and became friends, and we became friends as a result of that. And then we started just bringing guitar around to my house and started jamming on some tracks and then recording it. And with Luke as well in the studio.
Yeah.
So it's been. I mean, I learned a lot from that, from you, obviously from you, because you're my mentor when it comes to like certain parts of the music.
You're just easily led.
My sensei, you know what I'm saying? Because obviously when I'm with John, I learned everything about groups I've never heard of before, like blues artists, like people like Mott the Hoople. I've never heard of Mott the Hoople. I was like, what?
But you have. You've heard the music. You might not have known the names.
Probably, but I mean, you mentioned a lot of people I've never heard of that I've had to discover, and as a result, I'd like to think a better artist as a result. So, thank you very much. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what they say. You're just passing the information on.
All you ever do, sit there staring. Wipe away those tears. It's so hard remembering. What you gonna do with those wasted years? Hey! Take off that mask. It's an old disguise. Take my hand. Wipe those diamonds from your eyes.
On your album, you've had Keith Richards and Ron Wood on playing various instruments on your albums. I mean, you've just come off tour with Phil Rudd. I know you got a personal connection. You're the godfather to his son.
Yeah, his first son. Yeah, Tommy.
When I first met you, I saw ACDC pictures of you with them when you was a child. When you was about 7 years old.
Kits
yeah. You know what I mean? So like, How did you meet these guys? And how are you so close to Phil Rudd from ACDC?
Well, when we were talking earlier, and I said my parents had backed me to buy into a rehearsal studio. So in 1974 that is, not 1874, I bought into a studio, and they were one of the clients. So they were rehearsed ACDC as a band, had just arrived in the UK to do basically a tour with Paul Kossoff for his, All Right Now, Free. He was the guitarist in that, and he was starting a new band, Backstreet Crawler, but he had the misfortune to die on the way back to the UK before the tour, so they were left stranded in London. They'd had a couple of albums out in Australia, and they just happened to be at my studio. The partner that I had rang me up and said, "Oh, you coming down here? There's a band down here and they need a PA." And they knew that I had enough equipment to do gigs. So I went down there, back to the studio that night. I walked in and they said, "Oh, we've got a few gigs. Can you be the sound engineer and bring your PA?" So that started a whole new avenue for a while.
Where were the first gigs?
The Red Cow and the Hammersmith and Nashville, the Greyhound, and the Wichita Club, which is now Nell's Jazz and Blues Club. But the
Nashville, the one on North End Road.
Yeah, famous Three Kings now. But the original first one was at the Red Cow. So
ACDC playing.
Yeah. These are the first, UK shows.
And okay, so and this is
1976.
And how big are they at this time?
They aren't known at all. They're just 5 guys from Australia in London, stuck. They've got management, they've had records out in Australia, and their tour plans have just been busted wide open because Paul Kossoff's died. So they start out, we started the Red Cow for like, I don't know, £30 a night or whatever it was. And I think one of the earliest gigs was a scout hut in Watford with one man and a dog, literally. There were more people in the band and the two of us working the equipment and the management than there was that attended that gig.
So you were a sound engineer?
So I became the sound engineer through de facto that it was my gear, and they said, "We need some." So I was totally unprepared, and within 3 months I was doing like the Reading Festival and gigs, European tours and stuff. And I said, we did it for a couple of years on and off, and I just said that was it. I wanted to play more than I wanted to tote equipment around. So we stayed friends. So 43 years later, we're all...
Did you think they were going to get that big, that quick? Could you sense it in those
You could sense that there was something coming because they were being billed, and it was just an upward trajectory. They were like moving from those pubs, and within 6 months or 3 months they had the Sounds Lock Up Your Daughters tour. They had TV exposure. It was like Warner Brothers or Atlantic were getting behind them and saying, "Well, you've got to do something. We've got this investment." So they were on tour almost constantly after that. And as we said earlier, the Highway to Hell album was 3 years later, and they're still now marking that. It's on every T-shirt, even in Primark.
Because that's funny, because back in the days, I mean, I think to a lot of black people, we didn't know what ACDC stood for. You know what I mean? And I was at church. And serious, at church, I mean, I used to go to church, and I'm sure at church doing some brainwash us about rock and roll and everything, about hip hop as well, but everything but rock and roll. About this behind the time, it was like the devil music and and if you rewind it backwards and all this foolishness. You know what I mean? As if you know what I mean? But this was really what society believed at the time. You know what I mean? Even in my time when I was younger, there was no sound. What was I saying?
You were talking about, like, you know, how, you know, records being spun backwards.
Oh yeah. So basically, we was told that ACDC stood for Antichrist, Devil's Child. That's what I thought. That must be some evil Batman. And then someone said, "No, it's just the ACDC, the fuse thing." You know what I mean? But that's how misconceptions are placed in the media. This band's the devil, and Ozzy Osbourne, and I mean the old rock and roll devil thing and yeah, I mean, it's the same with hip hop now in the sense where you've got the scaremongering amongst around
Trap
it.
and all
Yeah,
that.
trap music, whatever new music it is, it offends the society. So I mean,
Yeah,
how
that's
was it
all
for
part.
you?
That's all part of the machine that sells it to the people. Because like rock and roll was the devil's music 10 years before ACDC or the Beatles, or 20 years before. In that whole, I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, they were all banned at some point, or not allowed to be shown from anything below the waist, so he couldn't twitch his legs. Or he
Even the
couldn't
blues
move.
was considered like deep dark music compared to it was like gospel, because it was like gospel music, and the blues was like the oversight.
Yeah, so good and evil. But I mean, if you think Sabbath, Black Sabbath, that is, I mean, they start 69 and 70, and then you got the Thin Lizzies coming through. So I mean, ACDC are like sort of 5 years after that even. So I mean, it was already evolving. And then after ACDC, you got the Judas Priest and the other bands that you mentioned with like the sort of tracks going back, and then the American mothers of whatever it was that were getting behind all of that and saying that you had to have stickers, and the lawsuits, and people had hung themselves because this music was like driving
The
them
rock
to
and
it.
myths.
I mean, I could think of a lot of music that would drive me to wanting to hang myself, but it won't, you know, it's just a state of mind.
Keep it like you